Now, it appears that swing voters in Wisconsin have turned on President Donald Trump. Now, that could be a big problem for his 2020 reelection campaign, which is already in the works. Now, what's interesting about this, this district, right, or this state, I should say, Wisconsin went for President Trump in 2016 over Hillary Clinton, but barely. He actually got about 22,000 more votes than Hillary Clinton, so that's a real close margin. Bit of a squeaker, right? Now, what swung that difference was some voters who were, and I've talked about this phenomenon before, you had Obama Trump voters, right? So these are people who voted for Obama, wanted hope and change or whatever, and then in 2016, they're like, I'm not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. I'm going to vote for somebody who actually is promising change as well. Well, again, there's a few reasons for that. And this is not the majority, I think, of Trump voters on the Republican side, because I think a majority of Trump voters did so because, not because of like, oh, change, whatever, or take on the status quo, etc. No, I think a lot of them, and I think there are studies that bear this out, that they voted for Trump based on racial lines, like racial anxiety. And so these are not those people, because it wouldn't make sense to be the Obama to Trump voter if you were really worried about, racial things, right? So anyway, now, according to Axios, some of those voters have, or I should say, very unhappy with their votes, or with their choice, with their vote. And let's go to George Engelman, right? George Engelman is a 49-year-old Obama-Trump voter, and he told the outlet, quote, I think he's a dirty crook that lies, cheats, and steals when he can. Well, that is not unambiguous. He voted for the guy, and now he's like, good Lord, I didn't realize how much of a terrible person he was. Well, I mean, there are outlets like, I don't know, Us or the Young Turks or, all these different independent progressive outlets that were saying, hey, Trump's pretty terrible and he lies and he, whatever, right? But he added, there's just a plethora of things that are still coming out. Shocking, criminal's gonna criminal, right? And when they're in spotlight, a lot of stuff's gonna come out. Anyway, now, it's almost like when you squeeze on a Velveeta cheese packet, and like there's stuff that comes out. You just got to keep on squeezing, right? And eventually it'll all come out, but it takes a while. Anyway, that's a weird kind of example. But anyway, moving on. Adam K., a 47-year-old Obama Trump voter. Notice how these are generally older people. Quote, he's been caught in a lot of lies. Just admit that you made a mistake and say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Little advice to Trump. Is he going to take it? Of course not, because he's not capable. He literally is not capable of doing that. He thinks, no, anything that happens to me is either fake news, wrong, or I just want to admit that I'm wrong because I can never be wrong. And so, look, he never admits to doing or saying anything wrong, despite being despite being caught in obvious lies and misstatements. Wow. Okay. But the overall point is the dude's pathological. And for some, of course, that outweighs other considerations, which would normally make a president fairly strong, a fairly strong contender for re-election. And, of course, that's on the economy, right? So, look, the economy, we're not in free fall, and we have been basically buoyed by a decent economic outlook. Or at least people are feeling very, I guess, good about the economy, about spending money. Now, Amanda S., who was a 39-year-old Obama-Trump voter, said, look, I like how the economy's going, but man, I cannot overlook this constant lying. Quote, he's getting stuff done, but he lies. I don't think he's a very good person, but he's getting stuff done, so it's hard. But what has he done? I mean, really, so the economy, right? So there's this fallacy, right, of thinking, and this is, I guess, misunderstanding of what the president actually does, and that what they do affects directly the job market. And the president just doesn't create jobs. They don't have a wand and good jobs. You know what I mean? And it's a obvious Bush reference. But what they can do is, of course, they can use a bully pulpit to push policy, right? So they can say, hey, Mitch McConnell, who's right now the leader of the Senate, or hey, back when it was, or Chuck Schumer, if the Democrats ever regain control and actually put Chuck Schumer in charge, which is obviously be a stupid mistake. But anyway, that's for a different video. Hey, whoever's in charge, say Mitch McConnell, right? I want to push this economic policy, so get on it. And then Mitch McConnell, of course, has to introduce it. And then you have a counterpart in the House. Generally, I think it's the Speaker of the House that is able to introduce legislation in that chamber. And so it's really Congress's job, right? The real power lies in Congress. And then, of course, when all that is debated and passed through the different chambers, then pieces of legislation get to the president's desk, and he can either veto them or pass them along. And of course, he could veto them, and Congress still has power. And if enough of them say, no, we don't want this, then they can override a presidential veto. So there's a clear separation of powers that's enunciated in the Constitution. Or not enunciated, enumerated in the Constitution. So anyway, that's why I don't like giving any president sole credit for the economy, whether it's a good economy or a bad economy. For example, back when we had President Obama and we had job growth, it wasn't all of his doing either. There's economic conditions, and of course the president does affect that, but generally most of the power is in the hands of Congress. So I don't know why these people are giving Trump credit for a good economy. When, look, if you want to say that, hey, look, the Republicans have been good for the economy, then I guess you could make that argument and not be incorrect in that respect, but incorrect in other ways, and I'm going to show you why. Now, Congress, speaking of them, what did they do, right? Well, they passed tax cuts for the rich. Now, look, these tax cuts, of course, did stimulate the economy a little bit, as they often do. There's a short-term stimulus involved in tax cuts, right? And that, of course, is illusory, right? Not only that, but the industry was deregulated thanks to some Trump executive orders. That's something that he directly did. And legislation that was passed in Trump's first year where the GOP had majority control. But as I said before, that was a bit of an illusion. A lot of tax filers now, since we're over a year into the Trump tax cuts, right? So they've had enough time to take effect, and most filers haven't noticed a big difference in their tax savings. Some of them had a little bit of a higher paycheck, and some had slightly bit of a higher return, and some also had a lower return, and didn't really notice much of a difference. So as far as the savings every week, yes, it is there, but it is small, and it really depends based on where you live. Now, in reality, most of the tax cuts benefits went to the wealthiest Americans. And what happened when they got a lot of money? Some gave small bonuses, and we've reported on that. Some, did some, maybe a little bit of small hiring. A lot of them actually did layoffs, which is an interesting phenomenon. And most did stock buybacks, the bigger companies. So there was over $1 trillion planned in stock buybacks for 2018. So what that does, of course, is that it increases their stock value, it inflates the stock market, and actually gives the impression that the economy is strong because some people will look at that as an indicator and say, well, the economy's doing great, I'm looking at the stock market. When in reality, the stock market doesn't represent Main Street, it represents Wall Street. So, again, as I mentioned, that whole thing is just a gigantic illusion. And so what the economy is running on now is basically what I would call a sugar high. Now, what happens after you have a sugar high? Well, you crash. Now, it happened after the Bush tax cuts, happened after the Clinton deregulation, 2008, the biggest financial crisis and subsequent recession that we've seen in modern times. And guess what? We're on track to have it again. And now, it won't be mortgages this time. I think it'll be in student loans. We have a student loan bubble right now where there's over $1 trillion in debt, maybe $1.5 trillion in debt by now. And nothing that Trump has done policy-wise, or the Republicans have done anything to help that bubble from expanding. In fact, some of the Trump's policies, as well as policies put forward by Betsy DeVos, the Department of Education head, have actually tried to make this worse. And some of the policies that they're looking at is making it harder for you to discharge your student loans. Now, look, I believe it was Joe Biden that was the deciding vote in making it so that you can't declare bankruptcy. And President Trump, if he wanted to do something about that, he could reverse that. And you know what? That would be in character for Trump because he did, after all, go bankrupt 6 times. So at least that would make sense if he would put forward that policy, but he has not. And none of his policies are addressing this. And basically, we're just giving the economy more sugar. So, but anyway, that said, one more comment here. And this is from Lisa White. Now, Lisa White is a woman who voted for Mitt Romney in 2012 and then voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So she was not a Trump voter. But even she says, quote, "He's done a lot for jobs in the economy. But I'm all about the way people treat people. And if you're going to be a jerk, then you kind of don't need to be the face of America." I think that comment's kind of what's going wrong with this discussion, right? People are focused mainly on he's mean to other people. Well, look, I get it. Yes, he is mean to other people. And I pointed it out in quite a few videos of mine, right? He is a liar. He is a cheat. I think he's criminal. He says horrific things, and he helps out bad people like white supremacists, right? And gives them cover. But that sucks. But in reality, it's actually worse what he's doing to American democracy. He is undermining American democracy. Over the weekend, he was making basically threats and priming his voters to think that the Democrats are going to steal the 2020 election. Couple that to what he said about his supporters being violent, or the possibility of his supporters getting tough, right? In so many words. And I mean, that paints a dangerous picture. If you're priming your audience and your fan base to think that there will be the Democrats stealing the election and then saying they will do violence on my behalf, I mean, that's super, super dangerous, right? And so I'm a little afraid about that, right? But then there's also his policy, and not necessarily his policy because he doesn't really have a policy core, but he's been basically rubber stamping everything that Republicans want while only pushing for basically 2 or 3 separate things. One was the tax cuts, which he got. Then there was the Muslim ban, which he has had mixed results on. And then, of course, the wall. And that's his pretty much main thing, right? And those are some of the policies that were super dangerous. But again, rubber stamping some of the Republicans' dream pieces of legislation. For example, pushing a budget that cuts Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And, of course, punishes people who are not wealthy or not of good means. And so all of that is actually more important to me and has more lasting harm for the economy and the country at large than him tweeting mean things about people. But at least we have some people saying buyer's remorse anyway. And I think that's important because, look, Trump won with first-time voters and also with Obama Trump voters. So they voted for change, right? But they got no change. Now, the racists were always with him and always will be. But it is those swing voters that mattered. And if he's losing those, well, then he might be in real big trouble. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.